A young woman was found stabbed to death inside a family business in Richmond. There was no disappearance lasting days. No long stretch of uncertainty about whether she had made it home. Investigators could narrow the critical window to less than an hour. That should have made the case easier. Instead, it created a mystery that has lasted for 4 decades. Shortly before Kim Diane Stolberg was killed, investigators knew she had been alive inside the building, moving through an ordinary evening. Then something changed. Someone entered the final minutes of her life. Police would later have reason to focus on that interruption, but no public identification followed. No arrest closed the gap. And the person who could have explained exactly what happened inside the office was the victim herself. More than 40 years later, investigators are still returning to the same narrow stretch of time. What happened inside that building during the final hour of Kim Stolberg's life, and who walked away from it? Kim Diane Stolberg was 21 years old. She lived with her parents in Surrey, British Columbia, and worked part-time at her family's engineering business in Richmond. Those who knew her described her as quiet and caring, someone who loved animals and spent much of her free time around horses. She was also an experienced equestrian. Her horse was boarded in the Southlands area of Vancouver, and earlier that evening Kim had told her parents she planned to go there. Nothing in the public record suggests she expected trouble. The evening, as far as anyone knew, still had somewhere ordinary to go. The family business sat along the 7900 block of River Road in Richmond, between Capstan Way and Cambie Road. By shortly after 8 o'clock on Wednesday, December 4, 1985, Kim was inside the office. Then came the detail that would define the case. Kim telephoned her sister. They were talking about a surprise anniversary party for their parents. It was an ordinary family conversation, the kind of call that would have meant almost nothing if it had ended normally. During the call, Kim noticed that someone had entered the office. She told her sister she did not recognize the person. Then she put the call on hold. Kim never returned to the line. That is the point at which the investigation acquires something rare in an unsolved homicide, a real-time marker from inside the victim's final known hour. Kim was alive. She was able to speak. She was not reporting an attack. She was not describing a known enemy. She was simply acknowledging the arrival of someone unfamiliar. The public record does not say that Kim gave her sister a name, a physical description, an age, a voice, clothing, or any other identifying detail. It does not say the sister heard a threat, an argument, a struggle, or the attack itself. What she heard was the interruption. Just before 9 o'clock that night, Kim was discovered stabbed to death inside the building. The interval between those two moments was less than an hour. For investigators, that narrow window was both a gift and a trap. It sharply restricted when the killing could have occurred, but it also placed enormous importance on a person Kim herself had introduced into the timeline only seconds before disappearing from the call. The obvious temptation is to call that person the killer. The evidence released publicly does not allow that conclusion. Police have never publicly stated that the unidentified visitor was conclusively proven to be the person who killed Kim. They have not said whether the visitor was ever identified privately, whether another person entered later, or whether evidence at the scene pointed in a different direction. That distinction matters. The unidentified visitor is the last unusual event Kim herself reported, That makes the person critically important. It does not, by itself, establish guilt. The strongest fact is therefore not that a stranger killed Kim. The strongest fact is that someone Kim said she did not recognize entered the office during her final known conversation, and she never returned to that conversation. Everything after that must be built from evidence that has not been fully released to the public. The current police account confirms that Kim was stabbed to death. It does not publicly specify the number of wounds, where they were located, whether there were defensive injuries, what kind of weapon was used, or whether the weapon was recovered. It also does not state whether there were signs of forced entry, whether anything was stolen, whether the office had been disturbed, or who found Kim just before 9. Those omissions are not empty space that can be filled with theory. A stabbing inside a workplace can be made to fit robbery, a targeted attack, a personal grievance, sexual violence, a chance encounter, or an offender who entered for another purpose. But without publicly released evidence supporting one of those explanations, motive remains unknown. The same caution applies to the office itself. It was Kim's family business, not her home and not an anonymous public place. Someone entering after 8 in the evening may have known the company, the building, an employee, a customer, a contractor, or another person connected to the business. Kim's statement that she did not recognize the visitor tells us something specific about Kim. It does not tell us whether the visitor recognized her. Someone unfamiliar to Kim could still have known exactly where they were going, or the encounter could have been accidental. Publicly, there is not enough evidence to choose between those possibilities. That uncertainty creates one of the central investigative questions. If the person came specifically for Kim, how did that person know she would be at the office that evening? If the person came for the business, was Kim simply the person who happened to be there? If the visitor was unrelated to the killing, then who arrived after the call went silent? None of those possibilities can responsibly be presented as the answer. They are the structures investigators would have to test. Kim's plan to visit her horse later that evening adds another piece of context. It suggests she did not expect to remain at the office indefinitely. She had described a routine next step to her parents. The public record does not say whether anyone at the stable was expecting her at a specific time, or whether her failure to arrive triggered concern. It would be wrong to turn a general plan into a precise appointment. But the plan matters, because it shows how ordinary the evening still appeared before the interruption. Kim was living a normal sequence of events: family business, a call with her sister, plans for their parents, then her horse. The killing broke that sequence without leaving a public explanation for why. In many cold cases, investigators spend years trying to reconstruct the victim's final day because the last confirmed sighting is vague. Kim's case is different. Her last known period of life is compressed into minutes. Shortly after 8, she is alive and talking. An unfamiliar person enters. The call is placed on hold. Before 9, Kim is dead. The mystery is not broad, it is concentrated. That concentration should, in theory, make every small fact more valuable. A vehicle on River Road, a person near the building, knowledge of who visited the office after hours, an unexplained injury, a conversation afterward, someone who knew Kim's routine. Police have not publicly confirmed any of those specific examples as evidence in the case. But this is why a narrow timeline matters. Ordinary observations can become decisive when the time frame is measured in minutes rather than days. The original investigation generated leads. The current police appeal acknowledges that early leads existed, but does not explain them in detail. No suspect from the original inquiry has been publicly identified in the latest official account. No arrest is described. No motive is announced. That silence is frustrating for anyone trying to understand why the case remained unsolved. But withholding details can also be deliberate. In an open homicide investigation, facts known only to the offender and investigators have value. They can be used to test a confession, evaluate a witness, or determine whether a person truly knows something about the crime. For that reason, the public absence of detail does not mean the original investigators had nothing. It means outside observers cannot safely claim to know what the police file contains. This is particularly important in Kim's case because the strongest public clue is so easy to overstate. The phone call is sometimes treated as if Kim's sister witnessed the beginning of the murder. She did not, based on what police have released. She knew only that Kim said an unfamiliar person had entered, and that Kim then placed her on hold. There is no published account of screams, no published threat, no published argument, no voice from the visitor, no sound of a struggle. The silence after Kim left the call is powerful precisely because the record does not tell us what filled it. That silence also creates a forensic problem. If the person who entered was the killer, the attack happened after a witness had already been made aware that someone was there. That could mean the offender did not know Kim was on the phone. It could mean the offender did not care. It could mean the encounter did not initially appear dangerous. Those are possibilities, not facts. The evidence released publicly cannot show which is correct. Investigators would have needed to examine who had reason to enter the office, who knew its layout, who knew the family business, who was in the area, and who could move through River Road during that short period. They would also have needed to look at Kim's personal life without allowing the brutality of the crime to generate assumptions unsupported by evidence. A stabbing can look personal. That does not prove a personal relationship. The number and pattern of wounds might help investigators distinguish among possible dynamics, but those findings have not been publicly released. Without pathology, scene details, and a full inventory of what was present or missing, any claim about rage, robbery, sexual motive, revenge, or targeted violence would be speculation. This is where many retellings of old unsolved cases become less reliable than the original file. The gaps are uncomfortable, so they are filled. A stranger becomes a stalker. A workplace becomes a robbery scene. A knife becomes evidence of rage. An ordinary evening becomes a secret meeting. None of those transformations are justified here. Kim's case is disturbing because the confirmed facts are enough. She was alone in the family office. She was speaking to her sister. A person she did not recognize entered. She placed the call on hold. She was found stabbed to death before the next hour. And 40 years later, no one has been publicly charged. Time did not make the case simpler. It made every surviving piece of evidence more valuable. Paper files age. Witnesses move. Buildings change. Memories fade. Physical exhibits can degrade depending on how they were collected and stored. People who once knew something may die before they ever speak. But time also creates tools that investigators in 1985 could not use. That is why the case has returned to public attention. In January 2026, Richmond RCMP renewed its appeal for information in Kim's homicide. The file had been digitized. An investigator with the Serious Crime Unit was reviewing it with modern investigative tools and advances in forensic technology. Police also specifically referenced advances in DN, a technology in the video released with the renewed appeal. That wording has to be handled carefully. It does not mean police have announced that the killer left a usable DNA profile. It does not mean genetic genealogy has identified a suspect. It does not mean a match exists. What it means is that evidence from the 1985 investigation can now be re-examined with methods that did not exist when Kim was killed. Forensic science has changed dramatically since the mid-1980s. Biological material once too limited to test may sometimes yield information with modern methods. Old exhibits can be rescreened. Trace evidence can be evaluated differently. Digital organization can help investigators compare names, addresses, vehicles, timelines, and old statements across a large file. But modern technology is not magic. If an exhibit was never collected, it cannot be tested. If biological material was contaminated or degraded beyond use, better equipment cannot recreate it. And even a DNA result would still require interpretation. A person's DNA at a family business could show contact. It would not automatically show murder. Context would remain essential. That is why the renewed appeal does not rely only on the laboratory. Police are asking people to remember. They have specifically said that even a small detail could matter, including information held by people who lived in Richmond at the time but have since moved away. The appeal recognizes a second kind of evidence that technology cannot manufacture: memory. Someone may have seen a person entering or leaving the area. Someone may remember a vehicle. Someone may know who had reason to visit the family business after hours. Someone may have heard an unusual statement later. Someone may have noticed an injury or sudden change in behavior. Again, those examples are categories of information, not facts publicly established in Kim's case. The difference is important. A responsible account cannot turn the police request for tips into a fictional witness statement. What police are saying is simpler. After 40 years, information that once seemed insignificant could take on new meaning when compared with the full case file. The renewed investigation also changes the way the old file can be read. In 1985, investigators worked with paper records, physical photographs, handwritten notes, separate databases, and forensic capabilities far more limited than those available today. A digitized file can be searched, indexed, cross-referenced, and compared in ways that are faster and more systematic. That does not guarantee a breakthrough. It gives investigators a different way to ask old questions. Who appears repeatedly in the file? Which names connect to the business, the location, Kim's routine, or early leads? Which statements contradict one another? Which exhibits were preserved? Which details were never followed because they seemed unimportant at the time? Those are the advantages of returning to a cold case with distance. The danger is hindsight. Once we know Kim was murdered, every odd interaction before her death can look predictive. Every unfamiliar person can look threatening. Every unexplained detail can feel like a clue. Investigators have to resist that pull. The goal is not to find a story that feels right. It is to find evidence that survives testing. The unknown visitor illustrates that problem perfectly. Because the arrival occurred so close to the killing, it naturally dominates the public narrative. But timing alone is not proof. To identify the visitor as the offender, investigators would need evidence connecting presence to the attack. That could come from forensic evidence, witness evidence, admissions, records, or a combination of them. None has been publicly announced as sufficient. The absence of a public suspect after 4 decades also means there is no responsible basis for turning Kim's relatives, co-workers, customers, acquaintances, or anyone else into implied suspects. The available record does not support that. An unsolved case can attract theories because theories provide emotional closure. Evidence does not owe us closure. Sometimes the most accurate description of a case is that the crucial information remains withheld, lost, or undiscovered. Kim's family has lived inside that uncertainty since 1985. The final phone call is especially cruel because it preserves the moment just before the unknown. Kim and her sister were planning something for their parents. The subject was not danger. It was celebration. Then the conversation stopped. The ordinary details of Kim's life make the violence sharper because they show what the case interrupted. She was a daughter living with her parents, a sister helping plan an anniversary surprise, a young woman working part-time in the family business, an experienced rider who expected to visit her horse later that evening. The homicide file begins where those plans end. For decades, the investigation remained without a public resolution. Then, 40 years after the killing, police returned to the same facts and put them back in front of the public. The office, the phone call, the unfamiliar visitor, the narrow window before Kim was found, and the possibility that evidence preserved from 1985 may still contain information that could not be extracted at the time. As of August 2026, the investigation remains active and ongoing. No one has been publicly charged with Kim Diane Stolberg's murder. Police have not publicly identified the person Kim said she did not recognize. They have not announced a motive. They have not announced a D in a match. They have not announced that the case is close to resolution. Those limits matter because an active cold case can produce hope faster than evidence. A renewed appeal is not a solved case. New technology is not a suspect. A reopened file is not a breakthrough. But it does mean the case is not merely sitting in storage. Investigators are reading it again. Evidence is being reconsidered. And the public is being asked to return mentally to Richmond on that December night. The central timeline has barely changed. Shortly after 8, Kim was alive inside the River Road office. During a family phone call, someone entered. Kim said she did not recognize that person. She put her sister on hold. Before 9, Kim was dead. 40 years of investigation have accumulated around those minutes. Yet the most important missing fact is still the same one. Who was the person who entered Kim's final hour? The office is gone from the moment. The call ended decades ago. The plans for the anniversary party never became the memory they were supposed to become. But somewhere in the original evidence, in an old recollection, or in information someone has never shared, there may still be a name that belongs inside that gap. Until that name can be connected to the killing by evidence, the case remains what it was on the night Kim never returned to the phone. A narrow window, an interrupted conversation, and a person who walked into the story without ever being identified publicly.